Ruth, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Now, in our last show, we ended at this crucial place where you were just about to talk about compassion. So let's start there and define that in a metapsychiatric terms.
Yes, metapsychiatry defines it as understanding the lack of understanding. This is a little bit different from the way we normally think of compassion. I think most people, or most of us, think in terms of pitying somebody, feeling sorry for somebody, wanting to be helpful, of course, and alleviating their pain or their suffering. But that's really a feeling. To pity somebody or to sympathize with somebody is an emotion. And the problem with that is that if we feel good, then we can be compassionate. But if we're not feeling good, if we're feeling bad about something, then we're not really able to be compassionate.
Or if we want someone to behave in a certain way.
Yes.
If we want a certain outcome from whatever difficulty they might be in, we're not going to be able to be truly supportive.
That's true. But when you define it in a completely different way as understanding the lack of understanding, then you have to say, well, what is it that we're lacking understanding of? And this is where, who am I and what is the purpose of my life comes in, because if we don't know who we are and what the purpose of life is, then we understand that we're all suffering from that lack of understanding.
Well, let's review those. Just, summarize. We're doing a whole series, but let's just review. So who are we?
Well, we've established that we are a spiritual being, which is to say a divine consciousness, that we are not alone, self-existent persons in this world, but that we are, in fact, one with the divine mind, or one with reality, or one with God, whatever word one likes to use for the ultimate being, the ultimate understanding, the ultimate realm of existence. All these words are kind of synonyms for what we in the Western world so often call God.
And so what is the purpose of our life?
And the purpose of our life is not to be a good person, which is kind of the altruistic idea, but to be a beneficial presence in the world.
And say a little bit more about that, a beneficial presence. What does that mean?
Yes, a presence is actually a quality of consciousness in juxtaposition to a person. So a quality of consciousness which is good-willing, which is loving, which is non-conditionally loving. I think we defined love before as non-personal, non-conditional goodwill. So a beneficial presence is a quality of consciousness that emanates from the divine mind, that emanates that kind of love.
So someone who's fulfilling their purpose would be someone who, when we're around them, we feel the love, or we feel a beneficence coming from them, from that space that they're occupying,
yes,
whatever they're involved with.
Yes, actually, it's a non-judgmental mental stance. It's a non-judgmental way of seeing life, and it is compassionate. It understands the lack of understanding, that we all suffer from this, because none of us are fully enlightened. Therefore, we have many difficulties in life as a result. And to understand that we are all suffering from a lack of understanding is something very healing. It's a very healing kind of consciousness that we're able to be aware of.
We can oppose that to, or we can sort of contrast that with someone who's high maintenance. Right? So someone's who emotional high maintenance. We all know people that to be around them is to give them a lot of attention. Just there's no way to be around them without sort of paying. That's what they want, is to have attention paid to them, or to be demanding, or that things need to happen in a certain way.
Yes.
And that's very different than someone who's a beneficial presence.
Yes, because that's the ego that's operating there. And the beneficial presence is egoless. It's really a selfless way of life, so that you're looking out on the world, not with a critical eye, not fault-finding, not judging people, but understanding that we all are suffering from this ego that we think we are, and its demands for attention, as you said, and to be liked and all of those things. So we look at individuals in a completely different way from that spiritual perspective.
Now, all this goes back to how we think, right, or thoughts. I won't say how we think. That's a misstatement, right, according to metapsychiatry. But explain the role that thoughts play in all of this.
Well, thought is everything, actually. thought is the basic stuff of life, as Dr. Hoare phrased it. And there are two kinds of thoughts. And we call them existentially valid thoughts and existentially invalid thoughts. Now, what gives us the right to call something existentially valid or existentially invalid?
Yeah, those are very big phrases. Let's break that down a little bit.
Yes, by the fruits you shall know them. As a matter of fact, it's similar to the Pagel principle that we spoke about in the first program, that you can tell whether the thought that you are entertaining is a valid thought in that it produces good fruit. And an invalid thought is harmful to us. And we are actually just a thought. We are a divine idea. How many people think of themselves as a divine idea?
Not often.
Not often.
And not often enough. Can you say anything more about that to help us understand that in some kind of more concrete way? I mean, that sounds so abstract to me, that thought is everything and that we are an inspired thought. I just don't, I'm not grasping it.
Yes, it's very hard to grasp, but we don't think of ourselves as being a thought. We don't think of the importance of the quality of our thoughts. But actually, that is the all-important thing to learn in life, that our thoughts actually do result in our life experiences. So if we're having troublesome life experiences, then we can go back to our thoughts and say, what is it that is going on in my consciousness? What thoughts am I entertaining that are, in fact, manifesting themselves in this particular problem?
So let's say I'm having trouble with my neighbor, that my neighbor's doing some sort of outrageous behavior. They're like having wild parties every night till midnight, and I'm upset about that. So how is that a problem of thought?
Well, it's a problem of thought if it's a problem to you.
Well, yes, of course it's a problem. They're keeping me up at night.
So what are you going to do, right?
Right.
So you have to figure out what to do, and that's the wrong question to ask. So we have two questions that we ask in metapsychiatry. The first is, what is the meaning of what seems to be? And the second question is, what really is? So if you are disturbed by that, then you're entertaining a thought about what you want and what you don't want. And I think we might have mentioned that before, that all suffering comes from wanting and not wanting. So if the thought that's in your consciousness at that point is a want thought, then it can result in disturbance of your consciousness, in which you become totally focused on the party next door that you don't like, and you lose your pagel, you lose your sense of peace and assurance. So the first thing to do is not to try to fix anything, not to try to call the neighbor in anger and tell them to cut down their noise, but to actually be still, to meditate, and to come to an awareness of peace and assurance and gratitude and love, and then an idea might occur to you.
Well, it already started occurring to me. I mean, it's very interesting that part of what I might get upset in that situation was that they're not thinking of me and keeping the noise down.
Yes.
So what's wrong with them? And I could build up a whole vendetta against them, wanting them to behave a certain way and thinking that they're actually doing this to hurt me after a while. I could really work myself up into thinking that they're having this party and they know they're disturbing me and they're just keeping doing it. And all of that is fantasy, right? It's not really true. It's just what I'm thinking.
It's your perception.
It's my perception. And that if I calm down, I could have a conversation with them, or I could join the party. Or, there's probably a lot of things I could do, right, that would be different than stewing in that kind of thinking.
That's right. You could even go to bed and become aware of pagel and find yourself falling asleep, and you would not even have noticed the noise that was taking place next door.
Interesting.
Yes, that is amazing, isn't it?
So that it's the thought that they're disturbing me, or whatever thought it might be, that is creating the tension. That is the tension.
That is the tension. That's right. It is one and the same thing. That's the problem, that we're not aware that our thought and our experience is exactly the same thing. It's not that it's causing it, it is it. Without that thought, you would not have that experience.
So that's why I could be somewhere with someone, and something can really bother me, and they don't even notice it.
That's right.
It's no big deal to them.
That's right. That's right. Two people observing the same thing at the same time, and one reacts to it in a negative way, and the other isn't affected at all by it.
And then I go to, okay, so I have 3 sisters, right? So we all grew up in the same family, and each one of us has a completely different experience of what it was like growing up in my family.
Yes.
Right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And so we get together and we wonder, well, what family did you grow up in?
I've had the same experience with my brother and my sister.
And that's part of the same thing. It's an example of what you're talking about.
Exactly. We have totally different recollections of experiences and totally different perceptions about a lot of different things, which is very interesting, actually, because it does say that each one of us is unique. Each one of us perceives things in a unique way, and that that's all right. We're not trying to change anybody or fix anybody or say, you're right and I'm wrong, but that each one of us actually has a different way of seeing it.
So where do those thoughts come from then?
That's an interesting question, and Dr. Hoare was he had actually a fantasy of metapsychiatry, which is, he said, if the thoughts are health-promoting, if they are enhancing your life, if they elevate you, if they are insightful, if they are refining to your consciousness, if they are uplifting, then they must come from the divine source. And he called that the ocean of love intelligence. We've spoken about love intelligence being one of the synonyms for God. And the thoughts that are troublesome in life come from the sea of mental garbage. And we could say that the sea of mental garbage is all preconceived notions. Those ideas which our expectations, our beliefs, our opinions, our assumptions about life, all these things are actually preconceived. There's nothing new there. But the ideas that come from the divine mind are always inspired. They're fresh, they're new, and they meet the needs in that moment, whatever that need is. So when we juxtapose with these 2 intelligent questions that we mentioned before, we juxtapose what comes from the sea of mental garbage with what comes from divine love intelligence. And that therein lies the healing that takes place, that if we are able to uncover the thought in consciousness that's leading to a problem in our life, and we are able to understand the spiritual counterfact to it, which is the second intelligent question, then a healing will take place. So this is a method of healing that is unique to metapsychiatry.
Well, let's talk us through this. If you can talk us through this using some example. Do you have someone that you've worked with that you could tell their story or kind of help us understand how you might use those questions and how it might play out?
Yeah, so here's a very dramatic story, actually. So I'll start with the dramatic one, and then we'll get to some very simple, ordinary, everyday experiences. But this healing took place on the telephone, actually. It was from Australia to Connecticut. So 14,000 miles distance, which just proves that space-time has nothing to do with it. But I was speaking with a gentleman who described that he'd had chronic, sharp pains in his knees for most of his adult life, all of his adult life actually, for over 25 years. And he felt so weak in the knees. He was always concerned that his knees would give out. And he also couldn't feel below his knees. He didn't have any sense of feeling in his lower leg or his feet. They felt disconnected, in other words, from his leg. And he also had a problem with his back. He wasn't able to stand up straight. And after talking with him several times, he told me the story of when his father died. And he was 11 years old, and his father had been in an automobile accident. And he was called to the hospital, and he sat by his father's bed all night long praying to God. He was a good Catholic boy, as he describes himself, praying to God to save his father, and his father died. And and at one point I said, you know, I think it sounds like you are really angry with God. And something snapped in him. And he had been crying while he was telling the story, but then he started sobbing deeply. And after a little while, he started laughing hysterically. And then again, some sobs, and then more laughter, hysterical laughter. And then finally, this went on for about 10 minutes. And I'm on the telephone listening to this and thinking, at some point, I started laughing. It was so infectious, I couldn't resist. I couldn't help myself, actually. And he said, you know, the most amazing thing is happening to me right now. He said, there's an energy that's flowing down through my knees, and my knees are not, they're not as painful. The pain seems to be dissolving. And he said, and now it's flowing down my legs, and I'm beginning to feel my lower leg and my feet. I haven't felt them in over 25 years. And then he started saying, you know, now this energy is flowing up my spine, and I'm beginning to stand up straight. And this went on for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, whatever it was, and he had a complete healing at that time. It was an unbelievable experience, actually, that it happened so rapidly. And he realized that what I had said, which was the meaning of his chronic pain, the meaning of his lack of feeling in his lower legs and in his back, was the fact that he had harbored this anger against God ever since. He was really, really angry at God. And the interesting thing was that he was totally unaware of it. So that thought, that feeling, was completely repressed in his mind. And when I gave him the right idea, or the idea that had been repressed, it released it. And there came this flood of energy flowing through his body that ended up healing him.
So this is fantastic, and we have to understand this a little more. Mm-hmm. You're saying that when his father died, he felt betrayed by God or was angry at God or whatever that was, and it was so profound that thought, God is bad, we might say, God is not helpful,
God failed him.
God failed.
Mm-hmm.
That thought, what translated into, I mean, I don't know how to say it, translated into this incredible physical pain in his knees.
Yes.
And that thought, that the physical pain in his knees was a communication about something, right?
It was actually the thought itself that was manifesting itself. You see, thought is energy. It's mental energy, and it has to go somewhere. So thought can be expressed in words, and it can be expressed in behavior, and it can be expressed in our actions and our activities, and that can be expressed in a constructive way or a destructive way. If it isn't expressed, then it's what we call repressed. It's not known we don't realize that we're not expressing it some way. It becomes repressed, and the energy then works internally and eventually comes out in some form. It may come out in the form of behavior also, and actions and activities, or physical symptoms and our experiences. So in his case, it was coming out in the form of physical experiences, physical symptoms. So once that thought was identified and he could see it, then it was released. It all of a sudden had been verbalized for him. And that was the release of it. And then the energy was free to flow through him again and to make him well.
So let's talk us through something, maybe in another way, to also help us illustrate, because this is such a deep point, right?
Yes, it is.
So let's talk about sort of the frustration or the anger that we see so much in our culture these days. People are afraid, they're frightened, they feel unsafe, right? They feel unsafe in their homes, or they feel unsafe in their communities. There's just this sense of unsafety.
Yes.
And how would you talk to that, or what could you say about that?
Well, when we're afraid, we're actually concerned with ourselves, and we're trying to solve everything ourselves. You know, so we go about what we find a bigger lock for our door. We turn on all the lights in our house at night. I mean, people do a lot of things now to help themselves feel more secure. But the answer, the solution really, not that those aren't intelligent, because maybe where they live that is the right thing to do, but the answer is to ask Divine Mind to protect us and to come to know that if there is such a thing as love intelligence, that it will always provide us with the idea that we need to keep us safe. Remember we spoke before about the airplane that had crashed? That's another example of it, where she was kept safe by the awareness of Pagel. So we need to pray and meditate more often, daily actually, in our lives in order to become aware of what is needed moment by moment. And we'll be guided. I used to walk in the dark at night before going to bed, and I never took a flashlight with me. I always took Pagel with me. And sometimes I wouldn't complete the walk because I had a sense that that maybe was not a place to go. Now, I have no way of validating that, but it certainly was a way for me to practice becoming aware of Pagel. And I always felt perfectly safe and secure. And I never had a problem.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but it's like recognizing that we have a sense of safety that we can trust.
Yes,
right?
That's right. There is something beyond us, which is within us, which will alert us to what is needed at that moment, or give us the right idea that is needed at that moment. And we know from the spiritual teachings, I think it's found elsewhere as in addition to the Bible, but perfect love, perfect love casteth out fear. And what that means to us is that if you become aware that love and intelligence is always present to guide you, to govern your consciousness, to give you the right idea, whatever is needed at that moment, you don't have to go around in a state of fear. You will know when you need to do something. You know when you need to, as I knew, to turn around at a certain point when I was walking at night. It didn't seem safe. I didn't have a sense that I was secure, so I would turn around and go home.
Well, what you're saying is incredibly radical, right?
Yes,
you're really saying that that we experience our physical selves, but we're actually spiritual beings, and that there's a whole nother level of reality that's going on that we can be sensitive to, which is this sense of peacefulness, of guidance, of love and assurance, and that we're safe.
We are safe, but we don't think so. And as human beings, we think we're vulnerable to all kinds of, well, we are vulnerable, but we can be safe. As long as we practice listening for divine ideas, we will be kept safe. It's a divine idea, after all, that comes into our consciousness when we're standing on the curb of a street and all of a sudden a bus comes too close. What is it that brought us made us move back? It's a divine idea, but we may not have caught it. We may not be aware that that's what it is, that this wonderful awareness of what is needed at that moment just comes to us. So we need to cultivate awareness of it.
Well, so what do you say, though, to people who say, well, look at all the crazy, randomly violent things that happen in life? I mean, that's what would you say to that?
Well, that's the point of view. You say life is random. Life is full of accidents. And we don't think so. That's a chaotic way of looking at life. Life is divinely governed. There are laws and principles to live by, and we're in the process of uncovering these laws. That is to say, civilization, the world, is always evolving to greater understanding of these laws. And metapsychiatry helps us to learn these laws. And our first principle is, thou shalt have no other interest before the good of God, which is spiritual blessedness. So that means if our consciousness, our interest, is turned to love intelligence to guide us, then we will be blessed. It will keep us safe. But that's so hard for people to believe because we're so used to thinking that we have to do everything ourselves. Again, it's that totally different awareness.
Well, I think then we like to look for a set of rules. So tell me what to do so I can be safe.
Exactly.
Right? That's immediately what we want to do. We want to say, well, so how do I pray? What do I do? How do I do something physical, right, or take some action or some task? What are the rules?
Yes, and so we're always asking the wrong questions, rather than saying, what is the meaning of this experience that I'm having of being afraid? And what is the spiritual counterfact to it? What really is that if we are afraid, that is because we're looking at life through our human lens. And if we would see that there is a consciousness, a love intelligence that's available to us at all times, then we would turn our attention to it. Thou shalt have no other interest before the good of God. What is that? That's Pagel. So we pray to become aware of Pagel, to keep ourselves in a state of peace. And when we are in that state of peace, then the idea that is needed comes forward. It's that simple. but it's hard to practice.
It's very hard to practice. And on that note, we're going to end this section of our series. And we have so many more ideas to cover and talk about to help understand what this really is talking about. But thank you, Ruth, for helping to enlighten us on all of this.
You're very welcome. Thank you very much.
And thank you for listening. Be sure to tune in next time when we continue our conversation about who am I and what is the purpose of my life with Ruth Robbins. This is Nancy Rosanoff with The Listening Place saying bye for now.